Acura's all-new ADX, a compact SUV that isn't just built for one thing, it's precision-crafted for everything. To escape the grind with available all-wheel drive. To go with your flow with available Google built-in.
Hey Google, turn it up.
Okay, turning up the volume. And crafted to be heard with an available Bang & Olufsen premium sound system. The all-new Acura ADX, crafted to match your energy. Acura, precision-crafted performance.
Take your vibes and go, 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 go.
Google is a trademark of Google LLC.
Hi, I'm Larry Correia, author of In Defense of the Second Amendment, and you are listening to the Dr. Sky Experience on Talk Radio 77 WABC.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the most impressive radio show that you're going to be hearing in quite a while. We call it the Dr. Sky Experience here on Talk Radio 77, WABC, the crown jewel of radio, ladies and gentlemen. And today, a very, very special guest. But before we do that, ladies and gentlemen, just a little background of the Dr. Sky Experience here on Talk Radio 77, WABC. As we mentioned before, we call it the crown jewel of radio, the iconic talk radio station 77 WABC. Many times we talk about, of course, the main mantra of the show is the subject matter of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather, but we also delve deeply into American exceptionalism, and as John Katzimatidis on his very popular nighttime Cats at Night radio show says, truth, justice, and the American way is what we also talk about here with exceptional guests. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we do indeed have another one of those. We'll be talking about the crisis going on today with the Second Amendment. And who other that can speak best about it is a brand new book by Larry Correia, this particular book by Regnery Press. It's entitled In Defense of the Second Amendment, and a little background on this particular book is in order. What part of the Second Amendment don't you understand? That's the question posed by award-winning New York Times best-selling author and professional firearms instructor Larry Correia. Drawing on his practical experience as the owner of a high-end gun store catering to both law enforcement and private gun owners, he's a competitive shooter and a self-defense trainer. Correia blasts apart the emotion-laden, logic-free rhetoric of the gun control fanatics who turn every mass shooting into an occasion for violating your rights and abusing the Constitution while doing nothing to fight crime. A little bit of background on our special guest is in order, too. Larry Correia, as mentioned, is a best-selling novelist, famous for his Monster Hunter series, is a popular blogger who writes frequently about Second Amendment rights. His famous essay, An Opinion on Gun Control, was an internet sensation with more than 1 million reads, and he has written for national publications on gun laws and self-defense, and he proudly lives with his family in Utah. Larry Correia, welcome to the Dr. Sky Experience here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. How are you, sir?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, I really appreciate this. You know, we both have something in common, and I want to share this with the audience. This interview is not about me, it's about you. But for the people who don't know my background, myself, I'm a licensed firearm instructor, been involved in the firearms industry for a long time. Spent a little time in the law enforcement world with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office for some 22 years in their QAP program, which is the Armed Posse program, and also spending a lot of time talking at different gun shows and, of course, spending time in the firearm industry. But, Larry, it's all about you now for the rest of the show. In Defense of the Second Amendment, talk about this because this is your first book on this particular subject, or tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, I'm a novelist by trade. That's what I do. I've written 25 books, mostly science fiction, fantasy, thrillers. I'm a pretty successful author. But before I became a writer, I was in the gun business, and I was a firearms instructor like yourself. I was a concealed weapons instructor. I was a machine gun store owner. I actually was what's called an SOT, yeah. Title VII. That's someone who can manufacture machine guns and suppressors. I did that for a long time. I worked in various capacities in the gun industry, and I was a defense contractor on the finance side, not cool stuff.
Yeah.
But so that's my background, and then I got into the writing, and that took off, and I was very, very successful. Many years later, Regnery was looking at putting out a book about the Second Amendment in defense of it, And it was due to the Bruin Supreme Court decision, which was looming. And they said, who do we know who's a really good writer who can talk to regular people? We don't want to book this academic. We don't want to book this, for statisticians. We want to be able to just, tell a story and talk to people and talk to what the Second Amendment means and why it's important. Who do we know who's a good writer who is also a gun guy and really knows his stuff? And one of the editors had worked on some of my thrillers and my science fiction. And he said, I know a guy. This guy eats, sleeps, lives, and breathes guns for 30 years, and he's a writer. And so they asked me if I would do this. I was super happy to be given the opportunity. I'm a huge believer in self-defense, armed self-defense. I'm a huge believer in the Second Amendment. And for me, it was a great opportunity. And so I was super excited to take it. And the book has just come out, and it's doing phenomenal. And people are very excited. And my goal is just kind of to move the needle and help on this debate and reach out to people who might be on the fence. And also people who are already on my side. I want to arm them with facts and help them articulate good arguments. Everybody's got somebody in their life that they can sway.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Larry. And it's great to have you here on the Dr. Sky Experience here. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, proudly to be here around the nation and around the world, and even maybe around the universe on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Our producer here is Richard Dugan, and we thank him for his talents in making this particular episode available. Larry, let's go back to something that you and I know pretty much by heart, but the folks out there, I think they should really take a look at the words that are behind the Second Amendment, those 27 sacred words. And here we go again. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, that's something that we hear. But Larry, in your book, let's start off from the basics, because so many people out there, they may be a first-time firearm purchaser, or how about this? In various parts of the nation, or maybe even around the world, there are people that are totally denied their rights, and you don't have to live in a far-off land to be denied your firearm rights. Let's zoom in on the home of Talk Radio 77 WABC out of New York City. And apropos, of course, let's talk about this Supreme Court decision that happened back in June. And let's go into it a little more. The New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. Talk to us about what this is, what the problem was before, and what the Supreme Court decided.
Well, basically, what we're looking at is there was three types of concealed carry laws in America. And there was what's called constitutional carry, where you could carry a gun. If you were a law-abiding citizen, you were good to go. You didn't need to go through any process. And those states, very common. Or 25 states that have that now. Then there was what's called shall issue, and that was the state would give you a concealed weapons permit if you were a law-abiding citizen and you applied. They would give it to pretty much everybody who met the basic criteria. Then there was what's called may issue, and that was states like New York, California. And these were states that have extreme restrictions upon who was allowed to have guns and who was allowed to carry guns in public. And what those almost always turned into were very bigoted schemes where usually it was pay to play. So if you were rich and politically connected, you could get a concealed weapons permit. But if you were just a regular guy with a regular job, you were out of luck. We've also seen where these were racist, where because it's up to the locals on whether they would issue these permits or not, and they would be straight up bigoted. If there was somebody who came in from a demographic they didn't care for, no permit for you, and if it was somebody they liked, they'd give them a permit. So it was a horrible system, ripe for abuse, ripe for cronyism, ripe for bribery. This is not New York, but Santa Clara, California got busted where they were just basically selling these to the highest bidder. So the only people in that particular county that could get a permit were tech company executives from Silicon Valley and I think some NBA players.
Right, and some nepotism involved in there, obviously, too. I mean, if you know somebody, and that's a disgrace because you and I both as instructors, we put our time into this, and I really enjoy this book, and I want people to get it because you go into this and talk about so many aspects. I call it the common sense guide to gun ownership, too, and really, I don't know if anybody's ever thrown those words directly at you, but I am taking the liberty in this particular interview. I've read the book from front to back, a little more than 200 pages, ladies and gentlemen, but a fun read, and most important, what, Larry, an informative read, and I see where it's basically geared to. It's not just geared to the the person who's an expert marksman or somebody who does like IPSC shooting. It's geared to people who may be venturing down the path of saying, hey, what? The world's not a safe place, and do I have options? And you bring about ways to do that. So this is a great story here. But let's conclude a little bit more. I mean, there's so much time to talk about this. The New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. So let's say people who are listening to this particular podcast on the Dr. Sky Experience, they're going, hey, wait a minute. You guys are out in the West. You have all these gun rights. What is now going to happen here since this was overturned? So what is it basically saying? The law required a license to carry in public. But now, what does that mean for people who want to go get a concealed carry permit? It's still not going to be easy from what I hear.
Yeah, so I'm trying to keep it simple here because I'm not a lawyer.
No, I understand.
So the Supreme Court came in and said, you can't do that. You can't have these tiers of rights. You can't do that. You have to come up with laws that are fair and equitable to people. There's a bunch of other stuff in this decision that's huge. It reaffirms the meaning of the Second Amendment that we get into in the book quite a bit. It reaffirms that why we have it is so that we can defend ourselves, and the state just can't take that away willy-nilly. So what's happened is all these states that are affected by this have to come up with new laws. Well, what they're doing is they're coming up with laws that are even worse. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out in court. Like New York State then came up with a new law, and their first proposed new law was the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard, where now to see if you were worthy to have your rights, they were going to go on social media and like read your Facebook page to see if you had good character.
Sure.
Just insane. I'm sure if you voted wrong, you have bad character.
I guess you're right on that one, my friend. There you go. That's a simple one to figure out.
Yeah, so they're proposing new laws, and they're equally ridiculous. So these are all going to be going to court. I haven't seen what the final one for New York is, but Maryland just unveiled theirs a couple days ago, and it's the worst thing you've ever seen. And basically, concealed carry is banned literally everywhere and 100 feet from everywhere. So you couldn't go any place in the state without violating the law. You couldn't travel down a street without being within 100 feet of all the places that it's banned. You couldn't buy a gun and take it home without breaking this law.
Absolutely. I want to make this clear too, Larry. Excuse me for jumping in. I want to make it very clear. Nothing in your book is an advocate that says, hey, folks, you're an advocate for self-defense. But you're not sitting here saying you must go out and get a firearm because that's the only way to defend yourself. You're exploring these options in this rather detailed book. But let's start off from the very basics here, and I want to get back to a couple of more of these Supreme Court cases. What's the main theme of your book that you can just tell us in this Dr. Sky Experience interview today so that people would be encouraged to want to go out and get a copy of it and read the details?
Oh, sure. I would say that self-defense is a human right. It's not mandatory. Having a firearm is not for everyone. If psychologically or emotionally, for whatever reason, somebody doesn't want to be armed, that's fine. That is their decision, and I don't think anybody should be forced. However, we're not you, and so just stop trying to stop other people from exercising their rights. Everybody's different. We've all got different levels of knowledge, commitment, education, training. Let people make their own decisions, and most people make good ones. We've seen the vast majority of the country now is pretty darn good at letting people exercise their Second Amendment rights. Most states, over half now, have constitutional carry, and we're fine. So the doom scenarios that these people keep bringing up, the panic, the terror, that doesn't really apply. And this goes into not just carrying guns, but having guns at home for defense. I get into the actual meaning of the Second Amendment. It's for defense up to and including against our own tyrannical government. And, I go there. I talk about all these laws.
You sure do.
And so I would say the main theme is that the Second Amendment is a human right intended for all people if they wish to exercise it.
At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can even finish the bachelor's degree you started in 22 months for $20,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
I just want to jump on a subject here that's kind of a little bit unnerving to myself. You see the legacy media, and I don't think you and I would have a dispute on this, and maybe many people out there are just so fed up that the whole story of firearms is never really presented right. And what you go into is that you've even offered what? Opportunities. This is interesting, folks. You've offered opportunities for individual people in the media to actually come and take a firearm training class. And if I'm paraphrasing this, or I guess the basic assumption here is, from what I read, is that nobody took you up on that offer at all. So how can somebody speak and bovate about a topic if they certainly don't know the truth and really the reality? It's like having a car, and in order to drive that vehicle, say it's a race car, they're so dangerous, these cars that go so fast. Well, you're offering a driving course in how to improve your driving skills so you can manage that driving experience with that type of vehicle, right?
Yep. Back when I owned a gun store, we had a simulator. So it was one of those things where it would broadcast like a giant TV screen on the wall, but it would put up a scenario, and you would be there armed with a gun that actually had a laser in it that would record your hits. And we would run people through shoot and don't shoot scenarios, use of force scenarios, law enforcement scenarios. And it was like, very realistic events, and you had to make decisions, and then the simulation would play out based upon the decisions you made, whether you shot, whether you talked to them, whatever. And so I had this marvelous training tool, and I had an offer to anybody who was in the news media. If you would like to come and use this and go through some of these scenarios, especially when they would talk about shootings where a citizen had shot a criminal or a police officer had shot somebody, I probably had a scenario that was very similar to that I could run them through so they could get a feeling for that and understand what was going on. No one ever took me up on it. That's amazing,
Larry, because, again, it really gets me a little upset. I mean, I'm going to be calm here in this interview because I want them to experience you and learn so much about why they can move toward this as an open-minded thing. Open your minds, folks. You don't have to carry a firearm, but at least have knowledge of the components, how it works. Because what do we teach, Larry, in our classes? Sight alignment and trigger squeeze, two most fundamental shooting, situations as far as when you're handling a firearm. But I'd rather you go down this path. So let's say this way, somebody, what they can learn from your book, if they're kind of saying, well, I really don't know if I want to do that. And, I really kind of think would like to also look at the possibility of buying a firearm for personal protection. What's Larry Correia's suggestion and some of the information? They can get the book and read the details, but just in this interview, some basics that you'd recommend.
Well, I walk people through the process. In the book, I do go through this in more detail, but basically, you need to find a place to get some basic knowledge and training. Your local gun stores are often a great place to start, but, theirs are going to vary in quality depending on who owns them and how smart they are and how educated they are. But you owe it to yourself to seek out training. Your local ranges will have instructors. They'll have advertisements for instructors. Do some research first. Just look them up on the internet, see what their reputation is, and start seeking out education. There's a lot of free education out there. As much as the NRA gets attacked and vilified, most of what the NRA's mission is actually education, not legislation.
Right.
And so there's a lot of things out there, resources for basic safety training. I go into this book, too, about, storing guns and how to do it around your family. And everybody's different. We all have a different situation. That's why whenever the law mandates you have to store guns a certain way, it's going to fall apart because we all have a different household. We have different family members situation. There is no one size fits all. So, if you're an intelligent adult, you just need to come at this in a way that you learn. Check your pride at the door. You don't know everything. Everybody, we're all new when we come into this. And just kind of learn where you can go. And I provide a bunch of resources of different places you can seek out information and good information. There's actually various places online where you can get good information. And then there's nothing surpasses in-person training where you have a coach and somebody educated who can walk you through how to actually use this stuff effectively.
Yes.
People who just buy a gun and think, okay, good, I'm good. I have a gun now. I'm going to load it and stick it in my sock drawer, and then I can just use it in a case of emergency. That's a recipe for disaster. You're setting yourself up for failure. You need to know what you're doing. But thankfully, there are a lot of good resources out there.
Well, Larry, this is an exciting time with you. You're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. We're here on Talk Radio 77 WABC out of New York. around the nation, around the world, and maybe even, what, Larry, around the universe. We call this radio station, and rightfully so, the crown jewel of radio, the iconic Talk Radio 77 WABC. Normally, our format consists of subject matters in the realms of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather. But since you and I are so pro-Second Amendment and so much involved in it, I thought today that we'd kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about what we call the category of American exceptionalism and our freedoms. And just like John Catsimatidis, the owner of WABC, Talk Radio 77, and his great popular show, Cats at Night, they stand for what? Truth, justice, and the American way. And so do we on the Dr. Sky Experience. Larry, I wanted to remind everybody the book is entitled In Defense of the Second Amendment. You can get it where all good books are sold. It just came out, recently from Regnery Press. And again, an honor to have you here. But I wanted to have you explain a little bit more about some of these particular cases in the Supreme Court. The Heller case back in 2008, I had a lot of personal experience in that. But if you don't mind sharing with the audience just the basics, I mean, what does that mean? And why is it so important for people who like and love the Second Amendment?
That one was where basically Washington, D.C. had these extremely onerous rules about how you could possess your firearms, and who was allowed to have them. And I'm not talking about carrying the guns because Washington, D.C. didn't allow us. I'm talking about owning them, just having a gun in your home. They had rules like that you had to keep it disassembled or unattainable. So should you need one in an emergency, you're just out of luck. Clearly, criminals don't care about that. But one of the most important things that came out of that case was the Supreme Court reaffirmed the original meaning of the Second Amendment, which most reasonable Americans have always believed, is that the Second Amendment is for you to be able to defend yourself. And it should not ban common and useful firearms. It cannot just take away things that are common and useful to the regular people. And part of that, too, is the original Second Amendment was if the weapon was of use to the militia, then it is of use to the citizen, and you can't ban it. And which is interesting because the way that the anti-gun people come at it is they come at it from the exact opposite direction. Say, well, if it's useful for the military, then you can't have it. No, that's the opposite of what the Constitution specifies. That's the opposite of what the Second Amendment is about, and the Supreme Court reaffirmed that. So the Heller decision was actually the first decision of our modern times that really started us down this road where it opened up a lot of lawsuits around the country against state gun laws, where they were basically taking away weapons that were common, useful, valuable for self-defense. And the Bruin goes back to that and reinforces that. And that's really where the common part comes from. And that's, in layman's terms, it's the Supreme Court saying that, yes, Americans, law-abiding citizens in America, have the right to have firearms available to them in order to defend themselves, and they're specifically the kind of firearms that are useful for defense.
Well, Larry, I have an interesting kind of sideline to this. My own experience with Heller is kind of a short and informative, maybe even a humorous story. We had him at the radio show I was doing at the time called A Call to Rights at the NRA convention there in Phoenix. So lo and behold, the good folks that were working with me, we set up an interview to have Heller, obviously the namesake of this particular Supreme Court case, there in person. And we sat down and we were talking to him. And boy, did we have a crowd around that booth. And I'm not exaggerating, not because of me. We probably had maybe 300 or 400 people, standing around like one of these shot show kind of booths. But the reason I'm telling you that is we, at a time I was working with a rifle company, we made sure that we gave a rifle to him in honor of the Second Amendment and had it engraved. Well, lo and behold, the person who engraved it, not our company, spelled amendment wrong. So as we're giving the rifle over in this big ceremony, this guy with a cowboy hat runs over, and it's none other than Ted Nugent. And he's yelling and screaming, going, "Don't you give that rifle yet." He goes, "I want to give it upstairs at the big convention side." But the interesting part about that story is, though we were celebrating this amendment and this, Supreme Court case, how about that? A little thing gone wrong. Got to get that word amendment spelled right. I thought that was kind of amazing, don't you think? That was crazy.
Nothing like when an engraver messes up, it's hard to do a typo on steel.
Absolutely. But let's get back to you. Let's talk more about some of these other Supreme Court cases. The U.S. versus McDermott, the city, that is, of Chicago, that particular case, McDermott versus the city of Chicago. I'm understood that it means something like this. The Second Amendment is protected under the 14th Amendment and states' rights. So you want to elaborate on more on that? I mean, that was an interesting decision in 2010. Was not as it's popular, but it wasn't given the big headline that the Heller case was.
No, it's actually interesting because there's a couple that reinforce the aspect of individual and state rights for the Second Amendment, with that being one of them. And there's also another recent one that it actually came out the same time as Bruen. I'll talk about that one in a second.
Sure.
But basically, this Supreme Court, as constituted over the last decade, has reinforced that the Second Amendment is a American human individual right, whereas the other anti-gun side tries to keep framing it as like a collective right, which is an idea that's anathema to everything in the Constitution. It's the opposite of everything the framers of the Constitution ever said. It's not an idea that's ever existed in American history, and none of the other amendments work that way. Yet, they come out and they have this collective right thing that, it's only for the militia, and the militia means the National Guard. And that's not the case. And so that's one of those things where not all of them, but many of our wins on the Second Amendment for the last generation have been from the courts and the states, because legislatively, Congress and the Senate have been afraid to tackle this stuff.
Exactly.
Because they caved to media pressure. And even the pro-gun side, the nominally pro-gun side, tends to wilt under pressure. There are some really good ones up there. I don't want to bag on everyone. Then the other.
No, I understand.
Say what?
Oh, I understand. So the interesting thing is, moving forward here, I mean, the time allotted today, this is so precious to all of us and the listeners out there. And again, I appreciate your time. You had some other thoughts on the Bruen Supreme Court case. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that, because many of our people are listening, of course, primarily. Well, I'm sure they're listening all over the world, but Talk Radio 77 WABC has a long heritage and history where they're beaming from New York City. So this affects people in New York City and New York State. What else would you like to add about the Bruen Supreme Court decision?
Well, the two that came out of the same session was Bruen versus New York State Rifle and Pistol, and also West Virginia versus EPA. And why that's related is very important in the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
Bruen reaffirmed that the government could not just take away common and useful weapons from people, and that we do, in fact, have a right to keep and bear arms. Very important. It shuts down their whole collective right argument, and it applies a standard that any gun law needs to obey that. And to have a gun law, you have to have a historical precedence from the early parts of the country's history that say that you have this ability to infringe on these rights. Okay?
Yes.
Where West Virginia versus EPA comes in was the Supreme Court saying that federal agencies can't just make up laws. That's Congress's job. And this is specifically the EPA doing like environmental regulations. They're just making up rules.
Right.
And they said, nope, that's not your job. That's Congress. So how this ties in is the ATF is the federal agency that administers gun laws, federal gun laws. Specifically, the National Firearms Act is where most of this is predicated on, from 1934.
Okay.
Well, the ATF has a bad tendency to just do whatever it wants with no gun law attached. So Congress didn't pass a law, or Congress passed a law that's tangentially related, but say it doesn't mention certain things. The ATF comes in later and says, well, we're going to add those things. Congress never talked about that. Congress never passed a law, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to ban bump stocks. We're going to ban pistol braces. And this is a big one that's just come out in the last couple of weeks.
It's amazing. So in other words, the ruling does not, well, they can say it's a ruling, and it is a ruling if it goes in the Federal Registry. But Congress is the organization that has the power to create laws, not the ATF. So this is very interesting what we're going to get into now, and I know this is for the time allotted. I wanted to jump pretty much headstrong into this.
Hello, Nigel here. I couldn't help noticing that you're still awake. Now, I'm an owl. I'm supposed to be up at night, but you need your sleep. So if it's your allergy symptoms that are keeping you up, here's a word to the wise. Try Zysol. You see, Zysol works fast to relieve sneezing, runny nose, itchy watery eyes, and itchy nose and throat. And it keeps going strong for 24 hours, so you can get your sleep and wake up refreshed and ready for a productive day ahead. Be wise all. Take Zizol at night. Use as directed. Starts working in 45 minutes.
People out there who have, let's say, AR-15 pistols and other, quote, short barrel type pistols, okay? Now what are we seeing, Larry? We're seeing that what was considered a okay legal, maybe that's not even the right word, but they were okay with this device called a brace. Now they're changing the whole classification and definition of a rifle. And what kind of a headstorm, what kind of a storm are we headed into with this? This is very confusing. Tell us in simple words what's going on.
Yeah, it's really bad. So they dropped it on the Friday afternoon before a 3-day weekend, before the Martin Luther King Day. Friday, late close of business, they dropped 293-page ruling.
Wow.
And it's gibberish. Speaking as a professional writer, as a professional editor, it's painful. And I've read it a couple times now, and I'm still confused. But what it is they took something that has been perfectly legal, and Americans have been buying in mass quantities for 10 years. So for 10 years, Americans could walk into any sporting goods store or gun show or local gun store, whatever. You could buy these off of Amazon. And Americans were buying a certain thing called a pistol brace, which is basically just it's a brace you would mount onto the back of a large pistol. It's like a balancing brace. That said, people could shoulder these. And yes, they could put it against their shoulder. But there was nothing in the law. Like I said, Congress has to pass a law. And Congress never specified anything about that being illegal. There's no law against that, like real law. So the ATF for 10 years let us buy these until Americans had bought tens of millions. The ATF says there's 3 million in the country. That number is absolutely laughable because the gun industry, the people who actually manufacture these, there's individual companies who are like, nope, we've made more than that. So realistically, the estimates from a nonpartisan congressional observation group, I can't remember what it's called, they say there's up to 40 million of these in the U.S.
Wow.
And I've seen numbers anywhere from 14 million to 40 million. ATF says 3 million, which is asinine. But even if it was only 3 million, that's still millions of Americans who for 10 years have been owning something that's been perfectly legal, hasn't hurt anybody. And now the ATF has just come out and said, well, you have 120 days to register these with the government or you're a felon. That's a 10-year prison term.
Wow, that's really dangerous, Larry. I mean, think about that. I mean, let's say people, because of their busy schedules, excuses of the law, is never a justifiable defense, ignorance of the law. But the point of the matter is so many people are really not paying attention to this. And if I'm correct, tell me if I'm right on this, the ATF is not going to charge you the traditional $200 tax stamp fee like, I have on certain firearms that I have in my personal collection, and maybe you do. I don't know. I don't ask. But the thing is, what happens now? Is it officially, from what you know, as of this date of doing this particular podcast, January 24th, 2023, is it, to your knowledge, officially in the Federal Registry, or it hasn't even gotten there yet? What do you know?
I am unsure, and I've actually, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, and I've seen conflicting on that. So I actually I do not know. I've seen people, some say, well, the ATF, it is valid, and it's now in the Federal Register, but I have not actually seen that confirmed anywhere. So I don't know if the 120 days has started. So I'm not sure on that. I don't know if that's officially started or if that's about to start.
Well, I got a big question. I got a big question for you. Excuse me for jumping in again, because I'm full of passion on this one. If you filled out a Form 4 type process to go get your tax stamped gun, whether it's a silencer, whether it's a short barrel rifle, machine gun, or what have you, and a lot of people don't even know that that's still legal. The question I'm asking you is, it took almost a year for me to get approved, not because I had any problems, and nor did you, if you have these. How are they going to handle 40 million of these transactions, and what are they going to do? I don't understand. It's insane.
This is the same government that spent billions and billions of dollars on the Obamacare website, and then it promptly crashed. Right. So the ATF is staring everybody. It's like, okay, all you millions of people, you should go use the e-forms, which is the ATF online form system. That thing crashes all the time. It never works anyway. It's always broken. And even if you do e-forms, it still takes 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, sometimes a year. I have a friend that's like a year and 9 months for his last transfer. Wow. And the ATF says, well, it's okay. Just send us photographic evidence that you possess this thing that we're saying is a felony. Fill out this paperwork on our unreliable website and keep the receipt. And we promise that we won't come to your house and shoot you.
Oh, wow. That's pretty scary, Larry.
That sounds comforting.
Right, I have a lot of confidence in that. Of course not.
Oh, yeah, they're so reliable. But the thing I'm super worried about is people who are gun nuts, people who are like enthusiasts. We keep up on the news, we keep up on this stuff. We're paying attention. We're not going to get caught unawares. But for example, when I was preparing for this book release, I was in a marketing meeting with a bunch of publishing people, and they were talking about current events. I said, well, the ATF is going to drop their brace rules pretty soon, and so I need to be prepared to talk about that. And that's going to affect a lot of people. And we just kind of moved on to the meeting because I didn't really was aware if any of these people were gun people or not. And this one woman stops me and she said, well, can we back up a second? What new ATF brace rule? And I had to explain this to her. She didn't keep up with this, but she owned one of these. And she had just bought one. And because she went into a store and bought it, it was perfectly legal. So how would she know that the ATF has pulled this bait and switch and she's now in possession of a felony? If she hadn't been having a conversation with me about this book, for marketing purposes, she would have just had an illegal gun sitting in her closet. And you know, what happens in a couple of years that if she didn't register and the ATF, I mean, it's 10-year prison sentence.
You know, this is really outrageous here. And, you know, obviously Steve Dettelbach, I guess, is the new ATF director as of July of this year, last year, 2022. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are confused. I think a lot of Second Amendment fans out there are particularly outraged. And obviously, Larry, in a future interview, I'd like to follow up with you if you're so kind to do this. But in the short time we have left today, I wanted to cover a couple of outstanding things that people really need to know about. I teach this in our concealed carry permit classes here in Arizona, and I tell people that the federal gun-free zone is something out there that can be very problematic if you're not really knowledgeable about the law. But describe to us why gun-free zones obviously are more dangerous for law-abiding citizens. And then I wanted to have you go on to talk a little bit, this is a subject we could do for hours, on red flag laws. These are two things, don't you think, obviously, that are so important to firearm owners out there, and also a death zone, in many people's opinions, when they have these gun-free school zones.
Yeah, the gun-free zone, first off, it's just a hunting preserve for innocent people.
Right.
We know for a fact, and I go into this in great deal in the book, and I look at a bunch of cases and look at the stats, the vast overwhelming majority of mass killings happen in places where guns are banned for regular people because criminals don't care. And we know that these guys that are on a mission to kill as many people as possible, they're trying to make some kind of statement, they prefer gun-free zones because they have straight up told us in their manifestos that they do. We have cases where they said, I am going to go shoot this place because I know that people aren't allowed to fight back. They're going to be disarmed. I can shoot more of them. And what happens is the only thing that stops a mass killer is a violent response. That violent response can either be immediate from somebody who is present, or it's going to be when the cops come, and that could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. And during that time, the bad guy gets to work. And the media is complicit in this because the media will then make them famous just like the one. And the media will talk about them and hold them up and put them on the cover of Rolling Stone. So it's this sick cycle where these things happen in clumps where then the next disaffected loser is like, okay, I need to get a big body count so I can be famous too. And then where do they go? They go to schools. They go to movie theaters that have a no guns allowed sign posted. They go to the mall that says no guns allowed. And what stops these cases are violent response. That violent response be a cop. It could be a regular person. And the gun banners, I always like to say, well, the good guy with a gun is a myth. Well, in this book, I have hundreds of these myths. I have hundreds of cases and examples, and I link to places where you can find thousands of these, because people collect them, where individual citizens stopped somebody who was trying to do something horrible. They stopped him earlier. And then red flags is, oh boy, that is a whole other can of worms, because that is one of those newer ones. And it is a flawed idea. It's a logically flawed idea, and it's twofold. If you report somebody as being a danger to themselves and others and armed, and the judge stamps off and says, okay, this person's been red flagged, then the cops come and raid your house and take your guns away. Well, now, if you're innocent and you haven't done anything wrong, you have to spend hours in court and spending money on lawyers to get your rights back. And you can have these reports put on you by the worst people in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, let's say this way. You could have a disgruntled spouse or something like that. I mean, a girlfriend, a boyfriend. I mean, it could reverse itself from the other side. It doesn't have to be just, women being mad at men. It could be anybody. That's what's so dangerous.
Abusive stalkers.
Right.
We've had stalkers call in red flags against their victims, so their victims would be disarmed.
It's amazing, Larry. This is amazing stuff. But I want to remind everybody, the reason we're doing this interview today is because we honestly, wholeheartedly support the Second Amendment, both of us, not just the person on this end of the microphone that's just, maybe I'll read the book kind of thing. I'd read it from front to back. Privileged and honored to call you a friend, and also a person who believes in the right of self-defense. The book from Regnery Press by Larry Correia, again, In Defense of the Second Amendment, available where all good books are sold. You get the last word. We got about a minute or so, and just appreciate your time, Larry, to talk about this. And, I just hope that we can get a better resolution on the brace issue and all the other things that are going down here. But people need to understand the Second Amendment is in place, and thank God it is, that they're not looking any time. Well, maybe some people wanted to take it away, but not in our time, I don't think. At least we have the Supreme Court now, and hopefully individuals that will realize the human right of self-defense is so important. So you get the last word.
I would say I invite people to check this out. I hope it helps, like I said, for people who are already on the side of guns and the Second Amendment. I hope to give you facts and a kind of a handy little reference guide that you can use in your arguments to try to sway your loved ones. And also for people who are on the fence, people who are thinking about it, but they haven't really made that decision. I just want to arm you guys with knowledge, and then you decide for yourselves. And it'll just get educated and do the right thing. And I hope this helps. I hope you guys like it.
Well, thank you, Larry. And I'm a little concerned about where this nation is headed. Anyone who's trying to politicize or demonize these things, that's something you really have to pay attention to. And I just hope everybody through this particular interview at least has an open mind to at least look at some of the things that are happening and let them judge for themselves. But the vast majority of people that I talk to, Larry, from all walks of life, they believe strongly in our country and our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and, of course, our Second Amendment rights. I want to thank you for joining us today. Please stay on the line here as we go to the break. Larry Correia, ladies and gentlemen, the author of this book, again, In Defense of the Second Amendment. Get it wherever good books are sold. You're listening to me, Dr. Sky, on the Dr. Sky Experience. Proud to be part of this particular radio station, Talk Radio 77 WABC. Out of New York, around the nation and around the world, and probably even out of the universe, we call it the crown jewel of radio, the iconic Talk Radio station, 77 WABC. We thank you for your time, and, well, we always say from the other side of the fence, always remember to keep your eyes to the skies. And what do we also say in this particular interview? We say it and we mean it, Larry. Always refuse to be a victim, because a victim is simply someone with no options. Always what? Fight back legally and responsibly. And Larry, I think you would wholeheartedly agree with that statement, correct?
I would, yes. Absolutely.
Thank you, sir, for your time.